in this experience, and the rope not be mutual also? What is true of the rope is true of any other percept. Your objects are over and over again the same as mine. If I ask you where some object of yours is, our old memorial hall, for example, you point to my memorial hall with your hand, which I see. If you alter an object in your world, put out a candle, for example, when I am present, my candle ipso facto goes out. It is only as altering my objects that I guess you to exist. If your objects do not coalesce with my objects, if they be not identically where mine are, they must be proved to be positively somewhere else. But no other location can be assigned for them, so their place must be, what it seems to be, the same. Footnote. The notion that our objects are inside of our respective heads is not seriously defensible, so I pass it by. End footnote. Practically, then, our minds meet in a world of objects which they share in common, which would still be there if one or several of the minds were destroyed. I can see no formal objection to this supposition's being literally true. On the principles which I am defending, a mind, or personal consciousness, is the name for a series of experiences run together by certain definite transitions, and an objective reality is a series of similar experiences knit by different transitions. And if one and the same experience can figure twice, once in a mental and once in a physical context, as I have tried in my article on consciousness to show that it can, one does not see why it might not figure thrice or four times or any number of times, by running into as many different mental contexts, just as the same point, lying at their intersection, can be continued into many different lines. Abolishing any number of contexts would not destroy the experience itself or its other contexts, any more than abolishing some of the point's linear continuations would destroy the others or destroy the point itself. I well know the subtle dialectic which insists so that a term taken in another relation must needs be an intrinsically different term. The crux is always the old Greek one, that the same man can't be tall in relation to one neighbour and short in relation to another, for that would make him tall and short at once. In this essay I cannot stop to refute this dialectic, so I pass on, leaving my flank for the time exposed. But if my reader will only allow that the same now both ends his past and begins his future, or that when he buys an acre of land from his neighbour it is the same acre that successively figures in the two estates, or that when I pay him $1 the same dollar goes into his pocket that came out of mine, he will also in consistency have to allow that the same object may conceivably play a part in, as being related to the rest of, any number of otherwise entirely different minds. This is enough for my present point. The common sense notion of minds sharing the same object offers no special logical or epistemological difficulties of its own. It stands or falls with the general possibility of things being in conjunctive relation with other things at all. In principle, then, let natural realism pass for possible. Your mind and mine may terminate in the same percept, not merely against it, as if it were a third external thing, but by inserting themselves into it and coalescing with it, for such is the sort of conjunctive union that appears to be experienced when a perceptual terminus fulfills. Even so, two hawsers may embrace the same pile, and yet neither one of them touch any other part except that pile of which the other hawser is attached to. It is therefore not a formal question, but a question of empirical fact solely, whether, when you and I are said to know the same memorial hall, our minds do terminate at or in a numerically identical percept. Obviously, as a plain matter of fact, they do not. Apart from colour blindness and such possibilities, we see the whole in different perspectives. You may be on one side of it and I on another. The percept of each of us, as he sees the surface of the whole, is moreover only his provisional terminus. The next thing beyond my percept is not your mind, but more percepts of my own, into which my first percept develops. The interior of the whole, for instance, or the inner structure of its bricks and mortar. If our minds were in a literal sense conterminous, neither could get beyond the percept which they had in common. It would be an ultimate barrier between them, unless indeed they flowed over it and became co-conscious over a still larger part of their content, which, thought transference apart, is not supposed to be the case. In point of fact, the ultimate common barrier can always be pushed by both minds farther than any actual percept of either, until at last it resolves itself into the mere notion of imperceptibles, like atoms or ether, so that, when we do terminate in percepts, our knowledge is only speciously completed, being, in theoretic strictness, only a virtual knowledge of those remoter objects which conception carries out. Is natural realism, permissible in logic, refuted then by empirical fact? Do our minds have no object in common after all? Yes, they certainly have space in common. On pragmatic principles, we are obliged to predicate sameness wherever we can predicate no assignable point of difference. If two named things have every quality and function indiscernible, and are at the same time in the same place, they must be written down as numerically one thing under two different names. But there is no test discoverable, so far as I know, by which it can be shown that the place occupied by your perceptive memorial hall differs from the place occupied by mine. The percepts themselves may be shown to differ, but if each of us be asked to point out where his percept is, we point to an identical spot. All the relations, whether geometrical or causal, of the hall originate or terminate in that spot wherein our hands meet, and where each of us begins to work if he wishes to make the hall change before the other's eyes. Just so it is with our bodies. That body of yours which you actuate and feel from within must be in the same spot as the body of yours which I see or touch from without. There, for me, means where I place my finger. If you do not feel my finger's contact to be there in my sense when I place it on your body, where then do you feel it? Your inner actuation of your body meets my finger there. It is there that you resist its push, or shrink back, or sweep the finger aside with your hand. Whatever farther knowledge either of us may acquire of the real constitution of the body which we thus feel, you from within and I from without, it is in that place that the newly conceived or perceived constituents have to be located, and it is through that space that your and my mental intercourse with each other has always to be carried on, by the mediation of impressions which I convey thither, and of the reactions thence which those impressions may provoke from you. In general terms, then, whatever differing contents our minds may eventually fill a place with, the place itself is a numerically identical content of the two minds, a piece of common property in which, through which, and over which they join. The receptacle of certain of our experiences being thus common, the experiences themselves might some day become common also. If that day ever did come, our thoughts would terminate in a complete empirical identity. There would be an end, so far as those experiences went, to our discussions about truth. No points of difference appearing, they would have to count as the same. Conclusion. With this, we have the outlines of a philosophy of pure experience before us. At the outset of my essay, I called it a mosaic philosophy. In actual mosaics, the pieces are held together by their bedding, for which bedding the substances, transcendental egos, or absolutes of other philosophies may be taken to stand. In radical empiricism, there is no bedding. It is as if the pieces clung together by their edges, the transitions experienced between them forming their cement. Of course, such a metaphor is misleading, for in actual experience, the more substantive and the more transitive parts run into each other continuously. There is in general no separateness needing to be overcome by an external cement, and whatever separateness is actually experienced is not overcome. It stays and counts as separateness to the end. but the metaphor serves to symbolize